200,000 years ago, a human was trying to survive with just these things. If they couldn't find food, they died. If they ate the wrong thing, they were poisoned. But somehow, they survived. And here we are today. Tonight, we're going back tens of thousands of years to answer the question of what Stone Age humans ate. We'll sit at the table of hunter-gatherers. We'll examine hunting scenes on cave walls. And perhaps we'll learn surprising things about our modern diets. It's okay if you fall asleep. But have you ever wondered? How did the first humans eat meat before they used fire? Today we'll explore the diet of Stone Age humans. This isn't just a history lesson. It's also a journey to understand how the human body, brain, and culture were shaped. First, we'll see what the Stone Age was and how long it lasted. Then we'll examine the daily routines of hunter-gatherers. Then we'll address the discovery of fire, the importance of meat consumption, and the intricacies of plant gathering. Finally, we'll talk about what all this means for modern human health. Let's begin. But where to begin?
Human history extends far beyond the time of written record.
Archaeologists and paleontologists are finding traces dating back millions of years. The period we call the Stone Age encompasses the time from when humans began using stone tools to when they learned to process metals. This vast time span begins approximately 3.4 million years ago and ends around 3000 BC, earlier in some regions and later in others. So, more than 99% of human history took place in the Stone Age. Think about it. Our modern lives, agricultural societies, cities, technology, all are within the last 1%. For the remaining vast period, humans were hunter-gatherers. They only had tools made of stone, bone, and wood. The Stone Age is divided into three main periods. The first is the Paleolithic Age, or Old Stone Age. This period begins approximately 3.4 million years ago and ends around 10,000 BC. During this time, humans were nomadic. They lived in small groups. They were constantly on the move to find food. The second period is the Mesolithic Age, or Middle Stone Age. This transitional period spans from 10,000 to 5,000 BC. People were still hunter-gatherers, but the transition to settled life had begun. The final period is the Neolithic Age, or New Stone Age. It begins around 10,000 BC and ends around 3000 BC. Agriculture begins during this period. Animals are domesticated, and villages are established. The period we will focus on is primarily the Paleolithic Age, because the basic form of human nutrition developed during this time. In the Paleolithic Age, the world was very different from today. The climate was constantly changing. Ice ages and hot periods followed one another. People had to adapt to these changes. While much of Europe was covered by glaciers, some parts of Africa could be warmer and wetter. The animals were also different. Enormous mammoths, saber-toothed tigers, cave bears, and giant sloths lived there. Humans shared the same environment with these giant creatures. Sometimes they hunted them, sometimes they fled from them. The vegetation was also constantly changing. An area that was forest today could be dry grassland 1,000 years later. This determined what people could eat. In other words, the Stone Age diet was not static. It varied depending on where they lived, the season, and the climate. Now, let's get to the question: how did Stone Age people really live? In popular culture, they are often portrayed as crude, primitive, constantly warring savages. But this is a very inaccurate picture. Modern archaeological findings tell a different story. Stone Age people were quite intelligent. They had complex social relationships. They created art. They played music, and they buried their dead. Some findings even show that they cared for the disabled and the elderly. This means there was empathy and social solidarity. When a skeleton with a broken arm is found and healed, we understand that this person was fed and protected by others, because they could not have survived alone. The physical characteristics of Stone Age people are also interesting. Their average height was slightly shorter than that of people today, but their bodies were extremely strong. They had a high bone density. Their muscles were well developed because they walked miles every day, carried heavy loads, and hunted animals. Their teeth were generally strong, with a very low rate of decay. This is quite surprising because there were no toothbrushes, but there were no sugary foods either. There were no processed grains. So their diet wasn't harmful to their teeth. Average life expectancy was short, but this was mostly due to infant mortality. If a person survived childhood, they had a very high chance of living to 60. Some communities even lived to 70. So old age wasn't an unknown concept. How did daily life unfold? They woke up early in the morning, probably with the sun. They went to sleep when darkness fell. There was no electricity,
no artificial light.
They lived according to the rhythm of nature. A large part of the day was devoted to finding food, but it wasn't constant rushing around. Studies show that hunter-gatherers spent about 3 to 6 hours a day gathering and hunting. The rest of the time was devoted to rest, socializing, childcare, tool-making, and entertainment. That's shorter than the working hours of modern humans. The culture of hard work came with agriculture. Agriculture tied people to the land, requiring longer and more arduous labor. Hunter-gatherer life, on the other hand, could be more flexible and less stressful. Of course, there were dangers, but there wasn't constant intensity. Groups generally ranged from 20 to 50 people. Larger groups were difficult to maintain because finding food became harder. Smaller groups were also more vulnerable to dangers. 20 to 50 people was an ideal balance. These groups communicated with each other. They met occasionally. They exchanged information. Marriages took place. This ensured genetic diversity.
There was no loneliness.
Everyone knew each other. Children were raised by the entire group. When a mother died, another woman breastfed the child. This community support increased the chances of survival. Now, let's get to the main question. What did all these people eat? To understand the diet of Stone Age people, archaeologists use different methods. The first method is fossil evidence. Animal bones are found in ancient settlements. These bones show which animals were hunted. The cut marks on the bones reveal how meat was cut with stone tools. The second method is tooth analysis. The wear marks on people's teeth show what kind of food they ate. Even microscopic scratches on the teeth provide information.
Hard food leave différents marques. Soft food leave différents marques.
The third method is isotope analysis. Carbon and nitrogen isotopes in the bones reveal what kind of proteins the person consumed. Was it a meat-heavy diet or a plant-heavy diet? This analysis reveals this. Another method is the analysis of fecal fossils, or coprolites. Yes, feces thousands of years old can be found. These feces can contain plant fragments, seed remnants, and bone fragments. These directly show what that person ate. Stomach contents can also be found, especially in remains preserved in glaciers.
You may remember the Iceman.
He lived around 3300 BC. He was found in the Alps. His stomach contents were perfectly preserved. Deer meat, grains, and fruits were identified in it. These kinds of findings show us the actual diet. Now there is also ethnographic data. Communities that still live as hunter-gatherers today are being studied. Of course, they were also influenced by the modern world, but they still offer some clues. So we have quite a lot of data to understand the Stone Age diet. Looking at the overall picture, we see that Stone Age humans were omnivores. That is, they ate both meat and plants. They were neither purely carnivores nor vegetarians. They followed a mixed diet. This was extremely important because being dependent on a single food source was dangerous. If you were a group that only ate a certain animal and that animal migrated, you would starve to death. But if you used a variety of sources, meat, plants, insects, fish, eggs, your chances of survival increased. Flexibility, the ability to adapt, was the strongest weapon of Stone Age humans. Now let's delve into the details of this diet. First, let's look at meat consumption. Meat played a critical role in the diet of Stone Age humans. But how did this begin? Early humans were probably avid eaters. That is, they didn't hunt for themselves. They collected the carcasses left by lions and tigers. They broke the bones with stone tools and extracted the marrow. Marrow was extremely nutritious, a rich source of fat and protein, inaccessible to other animals. Breaking bones required a powerful tool, so the first stone tools may have been made for this purpose. Around 2.6 million years BC, the first stone tools appeared in East Africa. They were quite simple, a stone with a sharpened edge. But even this was a revolutionary development, because now you could open bones, access the meat, and eat parts that other animals didn't eat. Over time, hunting skills improved. Stone tools became more sophisticated. Spears were made. Sharp-pointed spears were used. They began hunting large animals in groups: mammoth hunting, giant bison hunting, deer hunting. These hunts were both dangerous and rewarding. When a mammoth was hunted, the group could stay full for days, obtaining hundreds of kilos of meat. But hunting mammoths wasn't easy. It required planning, coordination, and communication. Perhaps human language developed during these kinds of collective hunts, because it was necessary to understand who was going where, who was chasing the animal, who was setting the trap. All of this needed to be understood. Before cooking meat, people ate raw meat. Was this possible? Yes, it was possible. Today, some cultures still consume raw meat. There's sashimi in Japanese cuisine. There's kitfo in Ethiopian cuisine.
The Inuit eat raw fish. So, the human body can digest raw meat.
But raw meat carries some risks. There may be parasites, bacteria, and digestion can be difficult. Especially tough meats require a lot of chewing. The human jaw and teeth are weaker compared to other carnivores. So we can eat raw meat, but it's not very efficient. But something changed everything.
The discovery of fire.
The discovery of fire is one of the most important turning points in human evolution. Fire didn't just provide warmth, it also completely changed nutrition. So when was fire discovered? There are different theories about this. Some evidence goes back to 1.5 million years BC. Burnt bones and ash remnants have been found in some caves in South Africa. But this doesn't prove that the fire was used in a controlled manner. Perhaps remnants from forest fires. More definitive evidence, music, dates back to between 800,000 and 400,000 BC. Regular hearths have been found at the Gesher Banat Yaakov site in Israel. Burnt wood and burnt seeds have been identified. This shows that people used fire in a controlled manner. Around 300,000 BC, the use of fire seems to have become widespread. There are traces of fire in almost every settlement. How was fire discovered? Probably from natural fires.
Lightning struck, trees caught fire.
People realized that this fire was useful. At first, they only carried fire from natural fires. They were careful not to extinguish the fire. Then they learned how to start fires. There were two methods. The first was the friction method. When two pieces of wood were rubbed together quickly, they heated up. Eventually, the dust ignited. The second was the flint method. When two hard stones were struck together, a spark was produced. When this spark fell on dry wood, a fire started. Simple but effective. Starting a fire could sometimes take hours. Therefore, keeping the fire alive was very important. Groups kept watch constantly. The fire had to stay lit, because restarting it was a difficult and time-consuming task.
The discovery of fire changed everything.
First, it became possible to see at night. Darkness ceased to be frightening. Lighting a fire at the mouth of a cave kept predators away because animals feared fire. This meant safer sleep. Second, it provided warmth. Survival in cold climates became easier. People were able to migrate further north. They spread to Europe and the cold regions of Asia. Without fire, these migrations would have been impossible. Third, socialization increased. Gathering around the fire encouraged storytelling, singing, and dancing. Perhaps the first religious rituals were performed around the fire. Fire became a central point that brought the community together. Fourth, and perhaps most importantly, cooking began. Cooked meat is much easier to digest than raw meat. Proteins become more accessible. The body can absorb more nutrients with less energy expenditure. This is very important because digestion is a very energy-consuming process. When you eat raw meat, your body spends hours digesting it. Your intestines work very hard. But when you eat cooked meat, this process becomes much faster and more efficient. Cooking partially pre-digests the food. Scientists have shown that people can take in more calories thanks to cooked food. This means having more energy. Where does this energy go? To the brain. The human brain is very large and consumes a lot of energy. It takes up only 2% of our body weight but uses 20% of the energy we consume. That's a huge percentage. If you don't get enough calories, you can't feed such a large brain. Some anthropologists argue that the discovery of fire and eating cooked food played a direct role in the growth of the human brain. Brain size began to increase around 1.8 million years BC, during the Homo erectus period. The first evidence of the use of fire emerged around the same time. Is this a coincidence? Perhaps not. Cooked food provided more energy. More energy meant a larger brain.
A larger brain meant better problem solving, better social organisation.
It's a cycle. Each step facilitated the next. Eventually, Homo sapiens emerged. Approximately 300,000 years ago, a species with large brains, the ability to speak, make complex tools, form social groups, and skillfully use fire. Now, what animals were eaten? Let's look at that. This varied greatly depending on the geography and period. In Africa, antelopes, giraffes, zebras, pigs, hippos, and even elephants were hunted. In Europe, reindeer, wild horses, bison, mammoths, and cave bears were targets. In Asia, wild cattle, deer, and wild boars were common. In North America, giant sloths, mastodons, and camel-like animals lived. Hunting large animals was risky but rewarding. A mammoth meant hundreds of kilos of meat. But killing a mammoth wasn't easy. It required coordination, strategy, and courage. Some archaeological sites show mammoths being chased towards cliffs. The animals would fall and get injured while fleeing in panic. Then humans would come and finish them off. These kinds of collective hunts strengthened the social structure. Smaller animals were also hunted, of course. Rabbits, squirrels, rodents, birds. These were easier to hunt. Traps were set, nets were made, and people were beaten with stones and sticks. Small animals might not be enough to fill you up on their own, but they provided a regular source of protein. Fish was also important. Groups living along rivers and lakes ate plenty of fish. Spears, fishing rods, and nets were used to catch fish. Shellfish, mussels, and oysters were collected along the coast. These were easily accessible sources of protein. Huge piles of mussels have been found in some cave sites in South Africa. This shows that the people living in that region regularly consumed seafood. Insects were also eaten. Today, 2 billion people in the world still eat insects. The situation was no different in the Stone Age. Locusts, termites, caterpillars, and bee larvae were nutritious. They were rich in protein, fat, and vitamins. They were easy to collect. When you opened a termite nest, you would get hundreds of insects. Collecting honey from beehives was also done. Honey was a natural sugar. It was a storehouse of energy. For Stone Age people, it was a difficult but very valuable food to find. Some cave paintings in Spain show people collecting honey from beehives. So, insects and honey were small but important parts of the diet. Eggs were also eaten. Bird eggs, reptile eggs. Collecting eggs was easy during their season. Colonies of seabirds, in particular, offered hundreds of eggs. When you found a nest, you collected them all. Some eggs were very large. The eggs of giant elephants that lived in Madagascar were 30 centimeters long. One egg could feed a family. However, these giant animals disappeared after encountering humans. Overhunting led to the extinction of large animals. This shows that Stone Age humans were not in complete harmony with nature. There was an impact. Sometimes a devastating impact. Yet hunting alone was not enough. The other half of the diet came from plants. Now let's look at gathering. Plant gathering is not as dramatic as hunting, but it made up at least half of the diet. Maybe more. Some estimates say that 60 to 70% of calorie intake came from plants. This makes sense. Because hunting isn't always successful. Animals can escape, the weather can be bad, you can get injured. But gathering plants is safer and more predictable. You learn which plants are available in which season. You know where to go. Gathering was mainly done by women and children. Men usually hunted, but it wasn't a strict distinction.
Everyone could do everything.
However, women were very skilled at gathering because they could manage both childcare and gathering. What kinds of plants were eaten? Primarily fruits. Fruits were nature's ready-made sweet treat. Sugary, delicious, easily accessible. Gathering fruit from trees was much easier than hunting animals. Apples, pears, plums, cherries, mulberries, figs, dates, bananas, mangoes. Every region had its own unique fruits. Some fruits were seasonal, only available during the summer months. Stone Age people knew when each fruit ripened. When fruit season arrived, groups migrated to that region. They gathered as much fruit as they could. If there was an excess, they tried to store it by drying it. But storage was a difficult task because fruits spoiled quickly. Animals could steal them. However, short-term storage was possible. Wild grains were important. Wild varieties of wheat, barley, and millet grew in nature. These were collected. The grains were crushed between stones, made into flour, and consumed mixed with water or cooked over a fire. Simple bread-like things were made. Grains were very valuable in terms of energy, rich in carbohydrates, and kept you full for a long time. But collecting grains was laborious because the grains were very small. You had to work for a long time to get a carrot or a grain. Therefore, until grain farming began, grains constituted a small part of the diet. But they couldn't be ignored. Roots and tubers were very important. Wild varieties of plants like potatoes, carrots, radishes, and onions were dug up from the ground. These plants stored calories underground. Even if the leaves died in winter, the tubers remained in the soil. So it was a way to find food even during the winter months. But knowing which roots were edible was very important because some tubers were poisonous. You could get sick if you ate the wrong plant.
You could even lose your life.
That's why knowledge of plants was vital. The elders taught this knowledge to the younger generation. Which leaves are edible? Which ones are poisonous? Which plants are available in which season? This information was passed down from generation to generation. In other words, Stone Age people were excellent observers of nature. Leaves were also edible. Spinach and similar green leaves were available. These were very rich in vitamins and minerals. Fresh leaves, in particular, provided vitamin C. Vitamin C is very important for the immune system. Its deficiency caused scurvy. This disease led to tooth loss, bleeding, and weakness. But this disease did not occur in people who regularly ate green leaves. So, even without modern nutritional science, Stone Age people intuitively knew what their bodies needed. Eating a variety of foods ensured they obtained all kinds of nutrients. Nuts and seeds were rich in protein and fat. Nuts such as walnuts, hazelnuts, almonds, chestnuts, and pine nuts were collected. These were ideal for preparing for winter, because they could stay fresh for a long time. Their hard shells provided protection. They were crushed open between stones. The oily kernel inside was nutritious. Some nuts were so high in calories that a handful was equivalent to a meal. So collecting nuts was a very efficient activity. You could get a lot of calories without expending much energy. Mushrooms were also edible. But mushroom picking was risky, because there were poisonous mushrooms. If you ate the wrong mushroom, you could lose your life within hours. That's why only experienced people collected mushrooms. Which mushrooms were safe was learned through years of observation. Now, a very interesting question. Did Stone Age people drink milk? The answer is a bit complicated. Animals hadn't been domesticated yet, so there were no cows, goats, or sheep. Therefore, there was no regular source of milk. But in some cases, young animals were caught. Perhaps their milk was tasted. However, most adult humans cannot digest lactose, because the lactose enzyme decreases after childhood. This is a genetic condition. After agriculture began, milk-drinking communities evolved. Lactose tolerance developed. But this didn't exist in the Stone Age. So milk wasn't part of the diet. Of course, breast milk was consumed outside of infancy. Breastfeeding lasted a long time, up to 2 years old. Sometimes children were breastfed for even longer. This provided both nutritional and immune support. What about salt? Salt is essential for the human body. Especially in hot climates, salt is lost through sweating. Where did Stone Age people get salt from? Mostly from meat. Meat naturally contains sodium. Blood is especially salty. Some communities drank animal blood. This provided both salt and protein. Those living on the coast obtained salt by evaporating seawater. Those living inland knew about salt rocks. Animals came to these salt rocks. People also obtained salt from there. But in general, the amount of salt in their diets was much lower than today. There were no processed foods. There were no salty snacks. This was good for heart health, because excessive salt consumption leads to blood pressure problems. Stone Age people didn't have this problem. Now, let's get to a very important point. How did Stone Age people store their food?
No réfrigérateur, no canning, no plastic bag.
Storing food was a huge challenge. The simplest method was to eat it immediately. Hunted animals were eaten that day. Leftover meat was shared. It was given as a gift to neighboring groups. This both strengthened social bonds and created an expectation of reciprocity in the future.
A kind of social insurance system. Today you give you meat, tomorrow you give me meat.
But there were still some preservation methods. Drying was the most common. Meat was cut into thin slices and dried in the sun or over a fire. Dried meat became lighter. It was resistant to insects. It could last for months. Similarly, fish and fruit were also dried. Smoking was another method. Meat left in the smoke of a fire both dried and killed bacteria thanks to the smoke. Smoking resulted in longer shelf life. Freezing was possible in cold climates. Meat was left outside during the winter months, like a natural refrigerator. It could still be consumed when spring arrived. Earth pits were also used. Food was buried underground. The cool soil slowed spoilage, but still limited the storage time. Animals could steal food. Bacteria could multiply. So long-term storage was very difficult. Therefore, Stone Age people generally lived according to daily consumption. Eat whatever you find today. The worry of tomorrow wasn't left for today. Now another question. How often did Stone Age people eat? The tradition of 3 meals a day began with agriculture. Hunter-gatherers followed a more flexible system. When they found food, they ate abundantly. When they didn't, they went hungry. This was something like intermittent fasting. Modern research shows that intermittent fasting can be beneficial for health. But Stone Age people didn't do it for health reasons. They did it out of necessity. Still, their bodies had adapted to it. There was no insulin resistance. There was no obesity. Because calorie intake was irregular. Sometimes a lot, sometimes a little. The body was prepared for it. Storing fat was a survival strategy. You stored fat when you were full. You burned that fat when you were hungry.
What about water?
Water is critical for life. 60% of the human body is water. You can survive a few days without water, but then you will die. Stone Age people lived near sources of clean water. Rivers, lakes, and springs were water sources. Water quality was important. Stagnant, polluted water carried disease. Clear, flowing water was safer. Some plants also provided water. Juicy fruits, fresh leaves, and rainwater were collected. Animal hides were turned into containers. These containers were filled with water. This made it possible to transport water. But long-term water storage was difficult. The water became cloudy. Microorganisms multiplied in it. So fresh water was always a priority. Was alcohol consumed? Probably yes. There were natural fermentation processes. When fruits fell and rotted, they produced alcohol. Animals were observed eating these fermented fruits and becoming intoxicated. Humans may have consumed these fermented fruits as well. Mead, made from honey, dates back to 700 BC. Similar drinks may have been made in the Stone Age, but there was no regular alcohol production. Consumption was accidental. Getting drunk may have emerged as a social activity. Perhaps it was used in religious rituals. Perhaps it was for entertainment, but there was no alcohol addiction in the modern sense. Because there was no constant source of alcohol. Now let's look at the nutritional value of the Stone Age diet. How does it compare to modern science? First of all, protein intake was very high. Meat, fish, insects, and eggs were consumed regularly. Protein is necessary for muscle building, the immune system, and hormone production. Stone Age people were very well nourished in this respect. Fat consumption was also important, but they were healthy fats. Fish oil, nut oil. These oils contained omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. They are critical for brain development. In the modern diet, trans fats and saturated fats are high, but these were absent in the Stone Age. Fats came from natural sources. Carbohydrate intake was low. Grains were not yet agricultural products. There was no bread, pasta, or rice. Carbohydrates came from fruits and roots. These carbohydrates were rich in fiber. They raised blood sugar slowly. There were no sudden drops. In other words, insulin balance was good. Modern diets are high in refined sugar and white flour. These cause blood sugar to rise rapidly and then fall just as quickly. This leads to energy crashes, weight gain, and diabetes. Diabetes didn't exist in Stone Age people because sugar consumption was very low. As for fiber, it was very high. Vegetables, fruits, and roots were rich in fiber. Fiber regulates the digestive system and protects intestinal health. It prevents problems like constipation and hemorrhoids. Vitamin and mineral intake was also very good. Eating a variety of foods provided all kinds of micronutrients. Vitamin C came from fruits, vitamin A from vegetables, vitamin D from sunlight and fish, and B vitamins from meat. Calcium came from bones and leaves. Iron came from iron. Zinc from nuts, magnesium from seeds. So, the Stone Age diet was truly very balanced and healthy. Of course, there were illnesses. There were injuries, infections, but nutrition-related diseases were very rare. Heart disease was rare. Obesity was absent. Type 2 diabetes didn't exist. Cancer rates were low. These are diseases of modern life. Poor nutrition, inactivity, stress, and polluted air cause them. These factors didn't exist in the Stone Age, but of course, everything wasn't perfect. There were periods of famine. Finding food was especially difficult in the winter months. Some years there were droughts.
Animal migrated.
Plants didn't grow. In these situations, people suffered from hunger and weakness. Some died. Infant mortality was high because babies are more susceptible to hunger. The situation was even more difficult for pregnant women. Insufficient nutrition led to infant loss. The elderly also faced difficulties. A person who had lost teeth couldn't eat tough meats. The group tried to feed them, but it wasn't always possible. So, the Stone Age wasn't a romantic era. Survival was difficult, but those who lived healthily were truly very healthy. Now let's get to a very controversial topic: cannibalism. Did Stone Age people eat each other? There is both scientific and emotional evidence on this subject. Cut marks have been found on human bones at some archaeological sites. Bones were broken, and marrow was extracted. This shows that cannibalism was practiced, just as it was done with animal bones. But why? In some cases, it could be due to starvation. In periods of extreme famine, human flesh may have been consumed as a last resort. Every means was tried for survival. In some cases, it could be for ritualistic reasons. Eating a dead person could mean taking their soul. In some cultures, eating an enemy meant seizing their power. So cannibalism wasn't always due to starvation. Sometimes it stemmed from cultural reasons. But was it widespread? No. Cannibalism didn't exist in most Stone Age communities. It was only seen in certain regions, at certain times. It would be wrong to generalize. Human nature is complex. Sometimes it can do terrible things. But most of the time, cooperation, empathy, and love prevail. Stone Age people were like that too. In general, they helped each other. They buried their dead. They showed respect. Cannibalism was an exception. It wasn't the norm. Modern popular culture portrays Stone Age people as savages. But that's not fair. They were human beings just like us. They felt fear, joy, love, and sadness. They loved their families. They protected their children. They lived in communities. The instances of cannibalism don't mean they were completely savage. Now let's move on to another topic: the diversity of the Stone Age diet. Each region was different. A group in Africa didn't eat the same things as a group in Europe. Because the climate was different, the animal species were different, and the vegetation was different. In tropical regions, fruit was abundant. Various fruits were available year-round. But meat was difficult to find because the animals were fast and hid in the forest. In northern regions, the situation was the opposite. Fruit was scarce, but large animals were abundant. Reindeer and mammoths were hunted. Finding plants in winter was almost impossible. Therefore, meat consumption was higher. In coastal regions, seafood predominated. Fish, mussels, and seaweed were eaten. In inland areas, terrestrial resources were used. So there isn't just one Stone Age diet. There are hundreds of different diets. Each community adapted to its environment and used the resources it could. This flexibility is humanity's greatest strength. We can live in almost any environment because we can change our diet.
The Inuit living in the polar region eat 90% meat.
Communities living on tropical islands eat 70% plants. Both survive. Both are healthy. This shows the incredible adaptability of the human body. Music. We are a very genetically flexible species. Thanks to this, we spread everywhere.
We conquer the world.
Now let's look at the beginning of agriculture, because this point marks the end of the Stone Age diet. Around 10,000 BC, agriculture began in the Fertile Crescent region. Wheat and barley began to be cultivated. Goats and sheep were domesticated. This was a revolutionary change. Instead of searching for food, you were now producing food. Control increased, but there was a price. Agriculture required a lot of work. Plowing, sowing, watering, and harvesting was tiring. Hunter-gatherers worked 3 hours a day. Farmers worked 10 hours a day. Also, dependence on a single crop became risky. If the crop failed, hunger began. Diseases also increased, because people were now living in one place. Waste accumulated. Hygiene was deteriorating. Close contact with animals increased infections. Dietary changes also occurred. Grain consumption increased significantly. Bread became the main food. However, grain was less nutritious than in the Stone Age diet. Vitamin and mineral deficiencies began to emerge. Furthermore, processing grain damaged dental health. Grain ground in stone mills contained fine stone particles that eroded teeth. Archaeological findings show an increase in dental problems in agricultural societies. Stone Age people had healthy teeth. Agriculturalists had poor teeth. Short stature also began to appear because diets became more monotonous. Protein intake decreased. Children developed less. Average height decreased. However, the population increased because agriculture could feed more people. A hunter-gatherer group consisted of 50 people. An agricultural village could have 500 people. So agriculture was a paradox. On the one hand, it meant more people. Civilizations were established.
Cities grew. Technology advanced.
On the other hand, individual health declined. Diseases increased. Working hours lengthened. Inequality began because there was now private property. Those who owned land became rich. Those who lacked remained poor. In the Stone Age, everyone was equal because no one owned property. Everything was shared. With agriculture, social classes emerged. Kings, nobles, priests, peasants, slaves, a hierarchy formed. These changes shaped human history. The reason we are here today is the agricultural revolution. But with this revolution, we also lost many things. The health of the Stone Age diet, the freedom of hunter-gatherer life, and a deep connection with nature. Today, some people talk about the paleo diet. This is a way of eating that tries to mimic the Stone Age diet. Processed foods are forbidden. Grains are restricted. Meat, vegetables, fruits, and nuts are the main foods. Is this diet healthy? In some ways, yes. Avoiding processed foods is good. Increasing vegetable and fruit consumption is good. Increasing protein intake is good. But it's not exactly the Stone Age diet.
Because we no longer live in the Stone Age.
We buy organic meat at the supermarket. We don't hunt mammoths in caves. Our lives are different. Our bodies are different. Some genetic changes have occurred. For example, milk tolerance has improved. Grain digestion has increased. So, returning completely to the Stone Age diet is neither possible nor necessary. But there are still things we can learn. Stone Age people consumed a wide variety of foods. We should also eat a variety of foods. Eating only one type of food is harmful. We should consume vegetables of every color, fruits of every kind, and different protein sources. Stone Age people didn't eat processed foods. We should also avoid processed foods. Packaged snacks, sugary drinks, and ready-made meals are unhealthy. Fresh, natural food should be preferred. Stone Age people didn't eat sugar. We should also reduce our sugar consumption. Excessive sugar leads to obesity, diabetes, and heart disease. Stone Age people were active. We should also be active. A sedentary lifestyle is deadly. We should exercise for at least 30 minutes a day. Stone Age people lived in communities. Social bonds were strong. We should also avoid loneliness. Family, friends, and community are important.
Loneliness damage mental health.
It even affects physical health. Stone Age people were close to nature. We should also return to nature. Walking in parks, climbing mountains, and swimming in the sea are good for us. Living among concrete jungles negatively affects mental health. So the lesson we should learn from the Stone Age diet is: live simply, eat naturally, exercise. Be in community. All these principles are key to healthy living. Now we come to the final part, the food culture of Stone Age people. Eating wasn't just about nutrition, it was also a social event. The group came together, sat around the fire, shared food, told stories, and sang songs. Mealtime was a time when the community was together, which was crucial because it strengthened social bonds, built trust, and fostered cooperation. When a mammoth was hunted, the meat was distributed to everyone. Generosity was important, sharing was valued, and selfishness was frowned upon. If someone tried to hoard food, they would be ostracized because survival required cooperation. Food preparation was done communally. Women gathered to prepare vegetables, men butchered meat, and children gathered wood. Everyone had a role, and this division of labor increased efficiency and made everyone feel valued. No one was useless, everyone contributed. The food was likely delicious. Meat cooked over a fire, fresh vegetables, fruits, and spices were used. Wild herbs, garlic, and onions added flavor.
Stone Age people knew taste.
They had a refined palate. They didn't just eat to survive, they savored their food. There were rituals. Some foods were considered sacred. Special meals were prepared for special occasions. The first animal hunted might have been the subject of a ceremony. They were thanked. They respected nature because it nourished them. This respect ensured sustainability. Overhunting was avoided. They took only what was necessary. They lived in harmony with nature. Today, we have lost this balance. We exploit nature, thinking it will go on forever. But Stone Age people knew that nature is limited.
If you harm it, you harm yourself. Now we all live in the modern world.
The Stone Age is far behind us, but our genes are still from the Stone Age. Our bodies have adapted to hunter-gatherer life for hundreds of thousands of years. The last 10,000 years is a very short time. Evolution doesn't work that fast. So our bodies are still suited to the Stone Age diet. Modern diets haven't fully adapted. That's why obesity, diabetes, and heart disease are increasing. Because the things we eat aren't what our bodies are used to. Our bodies expect Stone Age foods. We give them processed foods. Our bodies need exercise. We sit at desks. Our bodies are used to natural light.
We live in artificial light.
Our bodies are programmed to live in communities.
We live in isolation.
All these mismatches lead to health problems, but we can change them if we are aware of them. We don't need to go back to the Stone Age, but we can learn from them. We can eat more naturally. We can move more. We can socialize more. We can spend more time in nature. These are simple changes, but they make a big difference. Health isn't just about medicine and doctors. Health is a lifestyle. How we live, what we eat, how we move, who we spend time with. All of these affect health. Stone Age people knew this. They did the right things intuitively, without science.
Let's summarize together.
What did Stone Age people eat?
The answer, everything.
Meat, fish, insects, eggs, fruits, vegetables, roots, nuts, seeds, mushrooms. A very diverse diet. A very balanced diet. No processed foods, no sugar, no artificial additives.
Only natural food.
Cooking over fire revolutionized the diet.
The brain grew. Humanity evolved.
Sharing was important. Communities ate together. Social bonds were strong. There were periods of famine. But during healthy periods, they were very healthy.
Agriculture changed everything.
The population increased, but health declined. Today, we can learn from the Stone Age diet. Let's eat a variety of foods, eat naturally, exercise, and be together. Dear viewer, we have taken a long journey into the lives of Stone Age people. Perhaps your eyes are closed, and you have fallen into a peaceful sleep. Perhaps you are still listening and curious. In either case, I hope this narrative has provided you with both information and comfort. The Stone Age was not just a primitive era. It was also a simple but healthy period when humans lived in harmony with nature. Yes, there were challenges, but different challenges than today. Perhaps carrying some of the wisdom of that era into modern life would benefit us all. Healthy eating, an active lifestyle, strong community ties.
These things existed in the past.
They should exist today. Tonight you learned about the eating habits of Stone Age people. I hope this information has added something to your own life. Now you can sleep soundly. Tomorrow is a new day. Perhaps a healthier day.
Good night and sweet dream.